The bitter wind, a blade honed on the eastern front, sliced through my threadbare coat like it wasn't even there. I still remember the way it stripped the heat from my bones, leaving behind a hollow ache that echoed the hunger in my stomach. But that was just the backdrop. The real chill, the one that seized my heart and squeezed it tight, came from the rumble. A low, guttural growl that vibrated through the frozen earth, growing louder with each agonizing minute. German Panzers, hundreds of them, the spearhead of a monstrous iron wave, bearing down on everything I held dear. My name is Aaron, and I was a Jew. A dwarf too, if you want the full picture. 2 strikes against me in a world gone mad. In the winter of 1943, deep in the snow-choked forests, my existence felt like a cruel joke played by an indifferent god. I was small, weak, and utterly insignificant against the steel behemoths that promised annihilation. Yet in that moment of absolute despair, a desperate thought began to flicker, a tiny ember in the crushing darkness. What if even I, Aaron, could strike back? I was just another cog in the vast, brutal machine of the German war effort, forced to labor in a supply depot on the outskirts of a forgotten village. My size, ironically, often made me invisible, a shadow flitting between towering crates and hulking machinery. They barely noticed me, the German guards, their breath pluming white in the frigid air, their eyes scanning for any sign of defiance. But I saw them. I saw the endless convoys, the mountains of supplies, and the meticulously organized rows of paint cans. Not just any paint. This was the special stuff, the camouflage paint, designed to make their tanks vanish into the snowy landscape. Dull, matte white, churned out in massive vats, then poured into sturdy 5-gallon drums. 40 gallons of it, stacked near the back, waiting for the next shipment to the front lines. 40 gallons that, to my starved and desperate mind, started to look less like camouflage and more like opportunity. The moral dilemma was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. Every fiber of my being screamed for survival, for escape, for the simple act of enduring another day. But how could I endure, knowing what those tanks represented? Knowing the fate of my people, the burning villages, the endless, unmarked graves? To do nothing was to be complicit. To act, however, was suicide. A Jewish dwarf, alone, attempting to sabotage the might of the Wehrmacht. The idea was insane. Utterly, gloriously insane. It started with a tremor. A slight, almost imperceptible shake in the ground that grew into a persistent thrum. The Panzers were closer. I could almost feel their cold, metallic breath on my neck. That's when I saw it. Not the paint itself, but a stray bucket, overturned in the dim light of the depot. A small puddle of the white liquid spilled on the dirt floor. A guard had kicked it aside, muttering curses. And then, as the depot's flickering generator momentarily died, plunging us into a brief, suffocating darkness, I saw it again. A faint, ethereal glow. It wasn't bright, not like a lantern or a torch. It was a soft, almost shy luminescence emanating from the spilled paint. A ghostly white radiance in the absolute blackness. My breath hitched. Phosphorescent paint. I'd heard rumors, whispers among the other laborers, of special compounds developed by German scientists, paints that could glow in the dark for signaling or for marking equipment. But to use it on tanks, to make them shine in the snow, it was counterintuitive, absurd. Unless it was a mistake, a batch gone wrong, or a compound accidentally mixed into the camouflage paint. Or perhaps a brilliant, terrifying opportunity. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of my fear. 40 gallons, enough to cover how many tanks? My mind raced, calculating in the darkness. A single Panzer was a monster, but 340 of them, painted in a ghostly glow against the pristine white snow. It was a vision. A nightmare for the Germans, a desperate prayer answered for us. The next few days were a blur of calculated risks and terrifying near misses. Every stolen moment, every hushed whisper, every quick glance became a matter of life and death. I needed to get that paint, all 40 gallons. and I needed to replace it with the ordinary camouflage paint so no one would notice until it was too late. My small stature, usually a curse, became my advantage. I could slip into forgotten corners, squeeze through narrow gaps, move unseen where others would be caught. The first 5-gallon drum was the hardest. My muscles, already weakened by hunger, screamed in protest as I wrestled with the heavy container. It felt like lifting a small elephant. I worked in the dead of night, the depot a mausoleum of shadows and creaking sounds. One drum at a time, I moved the glowing paint to a hidden cellar beneath an abandoned barn, a place I'd discovered months ago and kept secret. And with each drum I moved, the ordinary white paint, sourced from another part of the depot, took its place. The cold was unbearable, my fingers numb, but the fire of a burgeoning hope, however faint, kept me moving. 3 more drums, 20 gallons down, 20 to go. My body ached, every joint protested, but the vision of those glowing Panzers, like spectral hunters caught in their own trap, fueled my resolve. The growl of the approaching tanks was now a constant, terrifying symphony, closer than ever. I knew I was running out of time. My small act of defiance, born from a moral quandary, was now a race against annihilation, and I had no idea that this single, desperate gamble would ignite a search for a lost connection that would span decades, leading to a profound reunion, a healing that neither I nor anyone else could possibly foresee. The last 2 drums, 20 gallons of that spectral white, felt heavier than any burden I had ever carried. My muscles screamed, a raw, burning protest against the cold and the strain. Each metallic clang of the drum against the frozen earth was a thunderclap in the silent, moonless night, threatening to betray me. I could almost taste the metallic tang of fear, mixed with the acrid scent of diesel fuel from the distant tanks. My lungs burned, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but the image of those Panzers, those iron coffins for so many innocents, kept my numb fingers gripping the cold steel. I finally wrestled the last drum into the hidden cellar, replacing it with its dull, inert counterpart. 40 gallons. Done. 40 gallons of a silent, glowing death sentence for the enemy. I stumbled back into the depot, my body a husk of exhaustion, my mind a buzzing hive of adrenaline and terror. The deception was complete. The fresh batch of camouflage paint, prominently placed for the morning's deployment, was now my phosphorescent secret. The next morning broke with a sky the color of bruised plums, promising more snow. The German crews, oblivious, moved with practiced efficiency. I watched from the shadows, a ghost amongst the living, as they began to paint, the rhythmic scrape of brushes, the hiss of spray guns, the casual chatter of soldiers preparing for battle. It all felt surreal. They were painting their own doom, meticulously covering their steel beasts in a cloak of light that would betray them to the very heavens. I saw the first Panzer, freshly coated, roll out of the painting bay. It looked ordinary, innocuous. But I knew. I knew what secrets that paint held, waiting for the cover of night, or the dimness of a blizzard to reveal themselves. A grim satisfaction, cold and sharp as a razor's edge, sliced through my fear. The rumble grew into a roar. The ground trembled beneath my feet. One by one, then in columns, the newly painted Panzers began to move. 340 of them, a monstrous armored fist, punching through the snow-laden forests towards the front lines. I watched them disappear, their dull white camouflage blending perfectly with the landscape in the daylight. No one suspected. Not yet. But as dusk bled across the sky, painting the world in shades of indigo and gray, a blizzard descended. It was a whiteout, a furious, blinding curtain of snow that swallowed the world whole. Perfect. The perfect storm for my plan to unfold. The Panzers, now deep behind enemy lines, would be relying on that camouflage, on the cover of the storm, to push through. And then it happened. Through the swirling chaos of snow, a faint unearthly glow began to emanate from the advancing tanks. First, a subtle shimmer, almost a trick of the light. Then, as the blizzard intensified, each Panzer became a spectral beacon, a ghostly apparition caught in its own headlights. They were not disappearing into the snow. They were shining. Like colossal, luminous insects crawling across the frozen earth, they were visible for miles. The reports came swiftly, carried on crackling radio waves. Soviet forward observers, peering through the blizzard, couldn't believe their eyes. Allied air reconnaissance, normally grounded in such conditions, detected anomalous thermal signatures, then confirmed the impossible visual. Tanks, hundreds of them, glowing. The counterattack was swift and brutal. Artillery barrages, guided by these impossible targets, rained down with pinpoint accuracy. Dive bombers, braving the storm, swooped low, unleashing their payloads onto the glowing behemoths below. The snow, already stained with the blood of countless battles, now became a canvas for a different kind of horror. Explosions ripped through the night, turning the spectral glow of the Panzers into incandescent fireballs. The air filled with the shriek of metal, the roar of collapsing engines, the screams of men. One after another, the tanks erupted, their glowing paint now a funeral pyre. 340 Panzers, all destroyed. I heard the news later, whispered in hushed, terrified tones among the remaining German personnel at the depot. The official explanation was a catastrophic error in paint manufacturing, a tragic accident. But I knew. I felt it deep in my bones, a chilling mix of horror and triumph. My small, desperate act had turned the tide, at least in this forgotten corner of the war. But triumph was a luxury I couldn't afford. The depot was now a maelstrom of frantic activity, of furious investigations and desperate searches for scapegoats. I was a Jew, a dwarf, an easy target. My invisibility was gone, replaced by a terrifying vulnerability. I knew I couldn't stay. Under the cover of the next night, I slipped away. No farewells, no possessions, just the clothes on my back and the phantom glow of burning tanks seared into my memory. I walked for days, a phantom myself, through the unforgiving wilderness, driven by an instinct for survival I didn't know I possessed. My destination was a refugee camp rumored to be hundreds of miles west, a whisper of hope in a world consumed by darkness. It was during this desperate trek, huddled in the ruins of a bombed-out village, that I stumbled upon a small wooden doll. It was crudely carved, a little girl with wide, painted eyes and a missing arm. It lay half buried in the snow, clutched by a tiny, frozen hand that was clearly no longer alive. My heart seized. A child. Another victim. As I gently retrieved the doll, a faded, almost illegible name was carved into its back. Leah. I held the doll, its cold wood pressing against my palm, and for a moment the weight of the war, the horror, the burning tanks, all faded. All that remained was the profound, aching sorrow for a life extinguished too soon. In that instant, something shifted within me. The rage that had fueled my sabotage, the desperate need for survival, transformed into something else, a quiet, burning resolve. I couldn't save that child, but perhaps I could honor her memory. Perhaps in a world tearing itself apart, I could find something to hold on to, something to protect. I kept the doll. It became my silent companion, a tiny anchor in a sea of despair. I didn't know why, but I felt an inexplicable connection to this lost little girl, to the innocence she represented. What I couldn't have known then was that this simple wooden doll, bearing the name Leah, was not just a symbol of loss, but a clue. What I couldn't have known then was that this simple wooden doll, bearing the name Leah, was not just a symbol of loss, but a clue. 3. The journey west was a blur of ice, starvation, and the constant gnawing fear of discovery. I moved like a ghost, my small frame a whisper in the vast, unforgiving landscape. The doll, Leah, tucked securely inside my coat, became my only comfort. A tiny, silent presence against the crushing weight of solitude. I reached the refugee camp, a teeming, desperate microcosm of humanity, and eventually, after years of struggle, found passage to America, the land of the free, they called it. For me, it was simply a land where I could breathe without the constant threat of a boot on my neck. I settled in New York, a city of towering giants and endless possibilities, a stark contrast to the frozen forests of my past. I learned English, found work, and built a semblance of a life. But the war and the doll were never truly far. Every night, The phantom glow of burning Panzers flickered behind my eyelids, and every morning the small wooden figure of Leah reminded me of the impossible connection I felt to a child I'd never known. The ache to understand, to find the truth behind her name, grew into an obsession. It was more than just honoring a memory. It was a desperate need to stitch together the torn fabric of my own soul. My search began in dusty archives, in the brittle pages of post-war reports, in the hushed testimonies of survivors. I spent decades, a quiet, unassuming man haunting libraries and historical societies, poring over lists of the missing, of the dead, of the displaced. The name Leah was common, a cruel irony that made my quest feel like searching for a single snowflake in a blizzard. Many times I wanted to give up, to let the past remain buried, to embrace the fragile peace I had found. But then, I'd touch the smooth, worn wood of the doll, and the inexplicable connection would surge anew, pulling me back into the labyrinth. Years turned into decades. The world changed. The Cold War simmered and then cooled. Technology advanced, but the past remained stubbornly elusive. I was an old man now, my hair thinned and white, my steps slower, but the fire in my heart for Leah still burned. And then, in the late 1980s, an obscure German scientific journal, recently declassified, crossed my path. It detailed the experimental development of phosphorescent paints for industrial use in the early 1940s. A footnote, barely noticeable, mentioned a Dr. Klaus Richter, a brilliant chemist known for his eccentricities and his quiet, almost subversive opposition to the regime. Richter. The name sparked a faint memory, a whisper from the depot. I remembered seeing a lean, spectacled man, often working late, his movements precise, almost furtive. Could it be? I dug deeper, my heart pounding with a renewed, almost youthful urgency. I found records of Richter's family, a wife and a daughter. Her name, Leah. My breath hitched. The pieces, scattered for so long, were beginning to align. Dr. Richter had vanished in the final days of the war, presumed dead. But his wife and daughter, Leah, had survived, escaping to West Germany, then eventually immigrating to America in the 1950s. They had settled in a small town in rural Pennsylvania, a place as far removed from the war's horrors as possible. I found an address, a phone number. My hand trembled as I dialed, the weight of 40 years, of a lifetime search, pressing down on me. A woman's voice answered, soft and hesitant. "Hello?" she asked. "My name is Aaron," I said, my voice raspy with emotion. I have something that might belong to you, a doll. A wooden doll with the name Leah carved into it. A long silence stretched across the line, broken only by a sharp intake of breath. Then, a choked sob. "Leah," she whispered, the name a fragile echo from the past. "My mother. She told me about it. My father. He carved it for me." We met a week later in a quiet diner in Pennsylvania. Leah, now a woman in her late 50s, with kind eyes that held a hint of a deep old sadness. I placed the doll on the table between us. Her fingers, delicate and trembling, traced the faded carving. She told me her story. Her father, Dr. Klaus Richter, had been forced to work on military projects, including camouflage paints. He despised the Nazis, but feared for his family. He had discovered a way to subtly alter the chemical composition of a batch of white paint, making it phosphorescent, knowing it would be a death sentence for any vehicle painted with it. A silent, desperate act of defiance. He had left the doll, his daughter's favorite, near that batch. A silent testament. A desperate hope that someone, somehow, would understand. "He called it his ghost paint," Leah said, her voice thick with tears. "He told my mother just before he disappeared that if anyone ever found the doll and understood its meaning, it meant his last act of rebellion had succeeded. He hoped it saved lives, even if it meant sacrificing his own." My heart swelled, a torrent of emotions I hadn't known I still possessed. The moral dilemma that had plagued me for so long, the chilling question of whether my act of sabotage was right, finally found its answer. I hadn't just acted alone. I had completed another man's silent, desperate plea for justice. We had been two shadows, two disparate souls, working in tandem, unknowingly, to strike a blow against the darkness. It was a profound, healing reunion, not just with Leah, but with a hidden fragment of my own past, a validation of the impossible choice I had made. The rage, the fear, the isolation, they didn't vanish, but they were finally tempered by a deep, abiding sense of connection, of shared humanity. My act of sabotage, born from desperation, had echoed across decades, touching lives in ways I could never have imagined. It brought me to Leah, the daughter of the man who, like me, dared to fight back against an overwhelming evil, not with weapons, but with ingenuity and a quiet, burning conscience. Her father saved lives, and I, a Jewish dwarf, became the unlikely hand of his justice. The war had taken so much, but it had also, in its own twisted way, given me this: a connection, a purpose, and a profound understanding that even the smallest spark of defiance can ignite a blaze of hope. And so, the story of the Jewish dwarf who stole 40 gallons of German paint, turning 340 Panzers into glowing funeral pyres in the snow, isn't just a tale of war. It's a testament to the quiet heroes, to the improbable connections, and to the enduring power of a single desperate act of defiance. It's a story of how a tiny wooden doll, bearing the name Leah, became the anchor that pulled two shattered lives towards a shared, unexpected healing. Have you ever wondered what seemingly insignificant act might echo across generations, changing lives in ways you could never foresee? If this incredible tale of defiance and unexpected connection chilled you to the bone, make sure to hit that like button, leave a comment telling me what you thought, and subscribe to the channel. And don't forget to ring that notification bell, because the next story might be even more extraordinary.